So what the kind of work I do is to do brain imaging scans and genetics and behavior to see how the brain changes from babies to children to adolescents to adults. And the technology that we use is an MRI machine. And MRI is nice because it doesn't use radiation. So not only can you scan healthy kids, you can scan them again and again over the course of development and see how their brain grows throughout life. And we've done a lot of stuff with adolescents, and so I don't want to focus on that specifically, but one of the things for the adolescent brain that I think is key to convey is that it's not broken. It's not defective, it's not like a damaged adult brain. It's different from the brains of children. It's different from the brains of an adult. And some of those differences, I think, are key to the XY chromosome story that I wanted to provide the sort of background in terms of what we see in typical XX or XY development, and then along the way contrast how that might be different for people with extra X or Ys. And so I think we need that context of the typical development to understand this. So this is something that we never know which of the papers would get written or read by a handful of other people and stuff, but this notion that the brain isn't broken, interesting. There's actually this play that used a very similar byline in London, that the teenage brain isn't broken, it's been exquisitely forged by evolution. And someone pointed out to me, so I actually contacted them and said, hey, if I'm in London, do you think I could get in free? And they're like, no, but from your webpage, we could probably get you a senior citizen discount. Where so I took back all the good things I said about teenagers and stuff. But I think that, fortunately, I think that this is sort of getting out there. People are, beginning at least to sort of depathologize adolescence, not to sweep everything under the rug or these rose-colored glasses, but there is a lot of positives. And I think the same in terms of people with extra XY chromosomes, there's positives as well. And so I want to kind of focus on this balance. So these are what you see behaviorally. And these are the so-called big three, partly because they've been replicated hundreds of times. Each of them, teens will increase risk-taking. They'll increase sensation-seeking, which when I first heard those, I thought the same thing. They're not quite exactly the same. And they move away from parents, toward peers. And what I think really makes this deeply rooted in biology is not just humans, all social mammals. They do these three things as well. So, we're not going to stamp these out. I don't think we even should try. But these are the three big behavioral changes that go along with the brain things. Pretty close to where I live, the Smithsonian Museums have this Hall of Human Origins, which I think is a kind of a fun exhibit. But one of the side panels, it's actually on the floor, it's kind of hard to see, it's only about a foot big. But I thought it was really interesting in terms of it looks at how human brains change in response to climate change. And before seeing this and talking to the curator of the museum, I was like, wow, times got tough and only the most clever could survive when it got cold or food got scarce, and that, the tougher things got, the bigger our brains got as we had to survive in tough climates. And it turns out to be not the case. So the real key here is that what drove the increase in brain size was change in climate. And so the people in this room, we had ancestors whose brains were good at adapting to change. And it was the minority. So the human population got down to pretty small, 50 to maybe even 5,000 people at one point. But what was really key was this ability for our brains to keep options open, to still stay plastic. And this is opposed to Neanderthals, who actually survived in much harsher climates. Their brains were about 10-13% larger than humans. But when you find, they can find an enormous amount from dental records, but from these fossilized teeth and caves, if you're an 11-year-old Neanderthal, you're not with your parents, you're with your kids. And so they had adolescents and stuff, but it was really only humans that have teenagers in the sense of teenagers, still at home teenagers. They eventually got into their teens. But this is there's some cost to pay. It's a long time that we're dependent upon people to, feed us and protect us, and it's not an obvious solution to these types of problems. But as things worked out, it worked in terms of having this really long time where our brains aren't done. Also means we have really long time where our brains can optimize for different environments. We can live in the North Pole. We can live on the equator. We can live everywhere in between. We can even live in outer space for a little while with technologies that our brains have developed. But I think this is really this key concept in terms of Neanderthals. Their tool use didn't change for 300,000 years. I mean, they were sort of good for their environment, but they didn't have a good flexibility. But we do. And this is really the essence of my career in terms of how do we understand this adaptability, this changeability, which has downsides. A lot of my work is actually focused on the vulnerabilities, because it's when most things happen: schizophrenia, bipolar, eating disorders, substance abuse, panic attacks, all have their peak emergence during adolescence, but also this time of opportunity. And I think this is the key factors of understanding this. And the relevance to this with extra X and Y is that the development of that part brain in the frontal lobe is even more longer protracted. So there's a greater period of risk for things, but also great opportunities. This is a bit of an aside, but I think also relevant just from the comments of talking to people here. This adaptability is really being put to the test because the digital revolution, in terms of digits being ones and zeros, and also we can thought of as like screen time, of how much of our, as we're doing at this moment, interacting with ones and zeros, and cell phones and PowerPoints, and a lot of our waking hours. And really, I think it's affected so many things: the way that we learn, the way that we play, and the way that we interact with each other through Facebook and then the social media has changed so rapidly that I think I have here since Gutenberg's population of the printing press, maybe even longer than that. And so I've been very interested in this interplay between the adolescent brain evolution and digital technologies. So we won't go into great depth here, but I focused a bit on adolescents because they're young enough to embrace these changes. They're good adapters, early adapters, but they're old enough to master the technologies as well. So the screen time, they've been following this in longitudinal studies for over 10 years, and it's been going up and up in terms of, this is 2010 data, and the 2012 is available, but it's not published yet, but even more as we've gotten cell phones and more mobile devices. So, 11 hours, that's a lot of the time that we're awake, is interacting with these devices. And about 30% of the time, it's more than one. So you're doing your homework while you're checking your Facebook status, while you're listening to music, maybe eating, all the things. So a lot of multitasking. And so we're wondering, about the effects of multitasking. I should have.
Typical 16-year-old is doing all their homework all at once, and then some.
I'm working on my Spanish homework, chatting. I'm working on my Facebooking, trying to figure out math, doing Spanish, but then I'm also doing Facebook, listening to some and chat. I'm doing 2 different Spanish homeworks, texting, and I'm checking my math answers.
So sorry about the audio, but these are basically, the modern teens in a sense of Anika and Rocky have been in our twin study since they were little girls, and so we've kind of watched them grow up, and we wouldn't have thought to study this because who knew that this was going to happen. And they're wonderful, gave me permission to show us how they're great kids. I mean, they're both in the college of their choice now and stuff. This isn't sort of like weird, unusual behavior. It's the times that we live in. And so this ability to multitask, is another aspect that comes up with the XY chromosome in terms of this part of the brain that is the multitasker that helps do this, is getting there, but it's not as good as it's going to get for a longer time. And so things like multitasking may be even more challenging, like driving safety and stuff, that the more distractions and stuff, maybe even like preferentially an issue. So this is a non-neutral question. Is it too much? Is it too wired? Or is it, just a great thing that we now can Google everything and find out how to, recipes and fold sheets and almost anything you can think of, somebody out there has done it and it's on the internet. So this is an unanswered question, but it came up so often spontaneously just in talking to people here in terms of there's a big draw toward video games and other things, and whether that's good or bad, if that's like, should I curtail it, how much is too much, and the honest answer, we kind of don't know. In terms of, maybe it depends on what type of video games and what type of social media things, or if they're doing it instead of their homework, other things. So lots of nuances, but I think this is, as someone who works off adolescence, we can't escape this. This is, whether we like it or not, that genie's not been back in the bottle. This is a big part of the lives of teens, and I think teens with or without extra X or Y chromosomes. So the whole idea is, watch the brain mature, develop in terms of understand the path that the brain takes, the mechanisms, what matters, what we do as a parent, as a person, as a society, what are the influences for good or ill on how the brain develops. And so a very non-creative study plan. We have people come to the NIH and we do the brain scan. We get their DNA from blood, saliva, or skin cells. We see how they're doing it at home and at school. And about a fourth of the people are twins. A fourth of the people are healthy singletons, and the other half are people with different clinical disorders. So these are the key kind of summary of the 22 years of work in terms of the brain matures. It doesn't mature by getting bigger. So by first grade, by age 6, the brain's already 93% of adult size, which we didn't know, going in. We kind of thought, we'll watch the brain grow. It's this big, you can do arithmetic. A bit bigger, now you can do algebra. This big, calculus. And so it just doesn't work that way in terms of that the brain matures by becoming more specialized, and actually somewhat smaller, and more connected amongst itself. So it's like the different brain parts are like letters of the alphabet. And as you go from a baby to a child to a teen to an adult, the letters become words, and the words become sentences, the sentences become paragraphs, and that's how the brain matures, so to speak. And so we're just now being able to try to quantify these words, sentences, and paragraphs and relationships. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that because it's an area we'd like to examine in X or Y chromosomes. Also, I'll be touching upon this notion of this later maturing front part of the brain, but the earlier maturing limbic emotional systems and how that interaction accounts for a lot of the behaviors for good and bad. So this is what the brain looks like if we were to take it out and clean it up a little bit and put it on a white tablecloth to humans. This is what it looks like to the MRI machine. So the MRI machine just sees gray and white boxes. They're about a millimeter on a side. You can get them smaller with a more powerful magnet or longer time in the magnet, but for most of the papers out there, it's about 1 millimeter cubed voxels. And the white is, I think these look like bratwurst or little hot dogs, this sort of insulin wrapping that speeds up communication. And what the MRI machine sees as gray is kind of everything else, but it's the cell bodies where the DNA resides, the dendrites, these little antennae reaching out for information from other neurons, and the end branches of the axon that send out the information. But within each of these boxes then, we have 3 kilometers of axons, almost 100,000 neurons, 4.5 million connections or synapses. So we have a long way to go. I mean, the pictures are like colorful and almost irrationally persuasive, but we're not getting down to the level of like the kitchen tables. It's more like the plane flying over the city, seeing, that's the business area, that's shopping. You can see the kind of global things. But we really it's not as precise as people think about sort of telling people's behavior, thoughts, emotions from their scans. So we're trying to get there. We're trying to get deeper inside of these boxes, looking at non-human primates, getting more and more great technology in terms of magnets, and there's a lot of interest now in nano-neuro technology with the Obama Brain Initiative to increase funding in this area. So the MRI sees white and gray, and so that's what I'm going to describe in terms of what changes through life. So white matter is up and away, probably through the 5th decade for women, the 4th for men, that about 1% to 2% a year. It's not exactly straight, but sort of slow and steady. We get more and more of this white matter, which is basically insulation. From an engineering standpoint, it is insulation in terms of just like wrapping the rubber around a copper wire, and so what happens is that if you have this wrapping, then the information can go 100 times faster. So it's not very subtle. And the way it works is that the impulse actually hops between little gaps in the hot dogs. So instead of flowing down, it hops from one to the other. And that turns out to be real important as well, because a lot of the energy of our body, not just in our brain, our total energy that we're all using right now, is what happens, these gates open up, the ions rush in, the positively charged ions, and that's what creates this electrical signal. Well, you have to pay that back. They charge in because there's more on the outside than the inside, and after that happens, you have to reload, physically spend energy to carry them back out so they're ready to charge the gates again. That's about 20% of all the energy that we do. Well, with myelin, you only have to do it at these gaps. And so they're ready to fire again 30 times as fast. So we have 30 times less resting time between, 100 times faster, 3,000-fold increase in bandwidth. So that's huge. It's not subtle, and it accounts for a lot of our abilities as humans. But it's not just sort of, faster is better, pedal to the metal kind of thing. Information in the brain is really about the timing, and it's the pattern of firings, how the notes play together. That's the main course. That's not the side dish. That's how information is conveyed in the brain. And so the white matter does this exquisitely fine tuning. So, for instance, the cell in the front part of the brain, which I'll be talking about for a bit, it has to get information from our visual centers in the very back, from our hearing in the middle, from emotion in the center. And so all these inputs have to arrive within 50 milliseconds, within 51,000th of a second. And that one cell, they'll add all the yays, all the nays, should I fire or not, it'll either do one or the other. It won't fire 7%, it either fires or doesn't fire. That's exquisite timing. It's amazing that it ever works if you try to design it from the ground up. So for that visual input from the back, it's going to need more myelin to get there at the same time as something from the auditory centers more toward the middle. There's a bit of a trade-off, though. So as this myelin is created and laid down, it releases molecules that prevent further outgrowth, further new dendrites and arbors. So that's the deal. We get fewer but faster connections. So I grew up in North Dakota, where it's very good for pilots and driving. Everything's rectangular, square grids, quarter-mile things, very reliable right angles. You can get anywhere, quarter-mile turns. But then the roads that are used a lot, they become paved, and between major grain centers, they might even get multi-lane highways. Now you can zoom down them a lot faster, but now you can't turn off every quarter of a mile anymore. You have to wait for the exits. And the similar sort of trade-off in the brain in terms of younger kids. Yeah, they might not get problems as quickly because they have 1,000 options to consider, and they say, oh no, this is the way to solve this problem. And so the ones that are used a lot and lead to good outcomes, they get paved, they get streamlined. But you can't have it both ways. You can't sort of get specialized skills and keep the plasticity open. So globally, it's pretty 1% to 2% throughout. But at local levels, things can happen pretty dramatically. So like in a certain part of the brain, you might get an almost doubling of myelin in just 1 or 2 years. And so we're trying to understand these kind of sensitive periods of going from the brain development, when should we teach other languages or geometry versus algebra, or that these sensitive periods that is kind of growing in spurts and starts, starts and stops. But the whole idea is this idea of integration, so that the brain becomes more interconnected within itself. This is the letters to words to sentences idea, and that this idea of connectivity is the key for so many aspects of imaging. So it could mean connectivity in terms of whenever we have a memory, there's actually sort of physical changes. The DNA makes proteins that get sent down to the synapse and physically change these connections so that they'll be easier to do the next time. So that's one way the brain can become connected. It can just be this more and more white matter connects things. A coherence is when an activity in one part of the brain predicts activity in another. So that can be an electrical activity or a blood flow activity. So when we're doing a task, then that certain parts of the brain rise and fall together, work together, and other parts don't. So that's another way that these parts have been connected. They act the same. And one of the things that we've looked at more recently is this idea of one of the maxims of cells that fire together wire together. So the connections that we use a lot, that happen a lot, then they wire together in these physical changes. But we also see now that cells that fire together, wire together, grow together. And so we can look at how when there's growth in one part of the brain, then what other parts of the brain are growing similarly. And I'll relate this back to XXY and other SCVs as well. But there's a lot of convergence. So if we look at this idea of what parts of the brain grow together, having the same trajectories of growth, they map really well into what we see for what are the white matter changes and what are the changes in blood flow. So during a given task, when you're just, certain parts of the brain light up, but also when you're just resting. And we all have this sort of resting state, which has become really a huge focus of a lot of investigations. So when what is our brain doing when we're not doing a task? Quite a bit, actually, and quite consistently, even the first couple stages of sleep. And so this idea of resting state is different in autism, is different illnesses, has been huge. But what we see is these parts of the brain that are very connected while we're resting, we're not doing anything, are the same parts of the brain that grow together and have white matter connections together. There's another version of connectivity in terms of certain parts of the brain are affected by the same genetic or the environmental effects, and I'll relate this back as well to the X and Y chromosomes. But all of this is really studied with this type of math called graph theory. And
Sing something with a little bounce in it.
It's a small world after all.
No, anything.
So I think it's actually officially rated the most annoying song of the 20th century, kind of thing in terms of maybe just overplayed a bit. But this idea of a small world, so it'd be like you go to an airport and someone says oh, you're from North Dakota, do you know the Johnsons? Like, well, yeah, actually I do. And it's, oh, it's a small world, huh? And it's that same use of that term in terms of these small world networks of how systems are connected. And it actually goes way back 400 some years ago to Leonard Euler, one of the great mathematicians of all time. But more recently was kind of revivified with this paper looking at how computers are connected in the internet and how to best connect computers to survive a nuclear attack and be efficient. And the top guy, Strogas, is a mathematician, the bottom guy is a physicist, and they're like, this can't be right, it's too sloppy, right? They're engineers, they wanted Pythagorean solids or something. It just didn't ring true, it just wasn't neat and tidy. But it turns out that's the way it works, that actually the best way to do these wirings is this somewhat sloppy, not totally so, it's not totally random kind of connection. And who knew? This paper now is one of the most cited in all of science, the fascinating fields, because then it's like, oh, yeah, actually that's the way the stock market works. Oh, that's the way ant colonies work. That's how forests go. That's how galaxies are formed. So, and it's just so many of these things had the same math, these same patterns, including the brain. And so it really, for my sort of world, it changed everything. It was like, wow, the math is hard, so that's a drawback and stuff, but it's very powerful because we benefit from the work of economists, of astronomers, from all sorts of fields. We're all using this same type of math to characterize how nodes are connected by edges. So many things can be a node. People can be a node. Every brain neuron can be a node. Different parts of the brain, planets can be nodes. So anything you think of can be a node, and an edge is anything that connects them. It can be a physical connection. It could be a statistical connection. But if you look at everything as nodes and edges, you can share this kind of common approach. And so, for just as an example, we look at people that have child schizophrenia, so 20 with and 20 without. The usual ways we can't tell them apart, but using the graph theory approaches, we can. So the metaphor again here would be like, what's different in schizophrenia brains isn't the letters, or even the words, it's the sentences. It's how these different parts of the brain are connected. So we're eager to look at this in the X or Y chromosome group. So this is a whole new lens to look through to look for differences. And as an example then, from Nancy Lee and her group, looking at these are parts of the brain that are usually communicating a lot when we do language tasks. And just by looking at how these parts of the brain, how closely they grow together, then we can predict good and bad performance. So this is why I'm like really eager to have the people that have been in our studies, we've only scanned them once. But if we can scan again, then we can see how the parts of the brain are changing over time, and whether these changes are tightly coupled or more loosely coupled. So hugely motivated to do the longitudinal scans to follow up on people who are already in the studies. This is a pretty fresh look. This is new stuff. I think this is out now, but just as a couple of weeks. But it gives us a whole new chance to understand the brain development. So that's the story for white. The other is gray. I'm not sure how many British neurosurgeons are out there, but they're doing the operation. Doctor, what's the matter? Gray from the looks of it. The matter with gray matter is that it doesn't grow like white matter, right? It should. They're the same team. They work together from conception through death. They're not like opposing forces, but they're really different. White's up and away, steady growth. Gray is more of an upside down U, and so it builds up during childhood, hits a peak, and then decreases. And in this frontal area, it's about 11 in girls and about 13.5 in boys. It's pretty different in my business, and 2.5 doesn't sound like that much, but it kind of is. And every different part of the brain has a different sort of age at which it hits its peak. So this is actually looking at gray matter, but also if we go more microscopically, if we look at how many synapses, how many connections these cells have, very similar pattern, build up during childhood, fight in a sense, so sometimes called neural Darwinism, or competitive elimination. You build up and have fierce competition, and only the strong survive. That's not even just brain, it's almost so many things in nature. That's how you develop complexity. Overproduce, fight it out, and then it kind of levels off to adulthood. Dopamine receptors, I'll probably mention that a bit. So a lot of things work this way. Build it up during childhood, get like too many, fight it out, and then the ones that are left are going to be healthy and robust and strong. This is a movie created by the people who do the Zitz cartoon strip. I don't know if people get that where they're at, but it's a sort of focused on teenagers comic strip, and they created this graphic.
Grows like a tree. First, there is a flurry of growth. Then unused branches or pathways are pruned. And it is this pruning that gives the tree its shape for the future.
So what determines the pruning? Like, what determines which ones stay and which ones go? That's not in the genes. It's our environment and our choices and our actions. But I think it's actually very kind of empowering, concept. Once we have this overgrowth in terms of the activities that we do with our brain, that's how this specialization works. That's how our plasticity helped us. And if we're on the North Pole, how are we going to stay warm and get lots of calories? If we're on the equator, what fruits are edible and which will make us sick? All these very different, demands upon us. This is how it works. This is how the brain can change its activities so well. I mean, one of the things that I always find striking is reading. So people often talk about these digital technologies and stuff. Well, why are they bad? And you can go through a lot of things. Well, they're not doing the homework. Fundamentally, though, at some point, it just ain't natural, right? This is just not a natural thing. We're supposed to be with each other and touching, talking, all this, and just something wrong about a video interface. But reading's not natural either. Reading's only about 5,000 years old. I mean, most, for humanity, there was nobody read. And now, like, a lot of us spend our waking hours with written words or symbols. So it's this huge ability to adapt to the environment. And this is how it works. You overproduce, you have all these possibilities, but you only reward some of them. So this is a movie that it's a little complicated to absorb, but it's looking at the gray matter from ages 4 to 25. And the bluing is maturation, in the sense it's getting closer to the adult levels. It's a little tricky because it's actually not increasing. It's because the brain matures by specializing. But one of the things from this movie that got a lot of attention, some of it good, some of it bad, was that this the light part to turn blue. I can't reach it for short, but it's this part of the brain, the frontal lobes, and it doesn't really reach its adult thing levels to about 25. 25, that's like ridiculously late for an adolescent psychiatrist. When we started the study, we were like, should we go to 16 or 18? By 16, people are already winning Olympic medals. They're pretty big and way better at computers and stuff. And it's just a sort of society keeping us in school longer that we even would be asking this question. And they said, we'll play it safe. We'll overshoot. We'll go to 18. Well, just in case, 25 wasn't even on our radar screen. You're already, married, career, and all these things, all the choices, made. So it didn't, we kind of joked a bit, like if you go to the airport to rent a car, you have to be 25, or no wonder Hertz is all the best neuroscientists. That's why we're not making progress and things. But it kind of didn't go away. Ron Dahl, adolescent neuroscientist, described this as the paradox of adolescence. You should be at the top of your game. Tolerance for heat and cold, resistance to cancer, strength, agility, you name it, you're at your peak. Morbidity and mortality go up 300%. Number one by far is motor vehicle accidents. If you're an adolescent girl and die, half the time it's a car accident. But 2 and 3, suicide, homicide, depending on how people do the stats, all the top 10 could be kind of seen as judgment, decision-making, and emotion. So I don't want to overplay this by saying, and here's the exact reason and stuff, but this part of the brain is relatively late to finish maturing, which is, again, good. That's why we're here. As a species, this is a wonderful thing. But it's also the part of the brain then that is even longer protracted in XY, XYY, and XXX. And so just trying to sort of think through this what this part of the brain does. It's the so-called CO, the executive of the brain, for long-range planning, for impulse control, and for organization, getting through life, for habits and things like that. So I think it's really a key part. I mean, this is the kind of issues that adolescents often deal with in terms of long-range planning, impulse control, decision making, and so these are the kind of skills that again, not every person with an extra Y, but in general, these will be a longer path in terms of to get as good as you're going to get on these dimensions. It does tie together all the information to make a decision, everything from our past, everything that our senses are bringing us to at this moment, all of our hopes and dreams for the future. And in a sense, no wonder it's late to mature, because it's getting input from everything else. And to make decisions, it's the most different between us and other primates and stuff. So it's really this key area that is under protracted development. It's the part of the brain involved in social interactions and in dealing with other people, other things, which is another thing for many of the people that I talk to here and stuff. Like, in some ways, they're almost more comfortable with people younger or older in terms of it's the peer group that can be most challenging sometimes in terms of the social interactions. But this is a big deal. It may not sort of, be something that insurance reimburses or things like that, but in terms of fun, quality of life, the social things are a big part of life. In a lot of ways, it's the task of adolescence, and not to focus so much on the evolution stuff, but that's what worked. We had to team up. We weren't the strongest, fastest, swiftest, but we were able to work together in groups and getting into groups and things. It's part of survival. So we need to. It's not just sort of that we like it. It's really a key to our success in a lot of domains. The notion of time travel, in terms of the part of the prefrontal cortex, and there's sometimes this kind of jargon is like counterfactual. So the what ifs. So to try to imagine sort of how the future would be different, or how the present would be different, if different scenarios, and this ability we get better and better at. So even with typical developed people, well into our 30s, we're able to run more scenarios. The philosopher Popper was nicely, our hypotheses die in our stead. Okay? So we can try things out. No, that's not gonna work. But, I'll get a speeding ticket. No, if I crash on the skateboard without a helmet. So these sort of scenarios, and actually we're not even sure of the upper end. That may be quote wisdom too. As we get in, even older, we're able to run a lot of different scenarios, these counterfactuals. This will be harder if that part of the brain is still under construction. It's going to be harder to think through all of the consequences, and you might just act before all this has happened. So can we do something about that? That's what I've been wondering as well. Can we practice counterfactuals? Can we really just think through? Okay, well what so what if there was no school? What if all the cars were green? What if ice was heavier than water, sort of lighter? Just to kind of make people think through, like, what can you do with the brick is another common one. Oh, that's okay. What else can you do with the brick? What else? And you keep pushing people to kind of come up with more and more possibilities, so to speak. So that really hasn't been tried that much. Creative people tend to do it better naturally. They can do more counterfactuals, but maybe that'd be something we, as parents or educators or clinicians, can help practice these parts of the brain, but being patient. I mean, this, we might say, tempted to be impatient, yelling like, oh, why don't you, think through more of these things? Well, that part of the brain that's helping with that might not be quite on board yet. And I think I did mention it, and it is, multitasking. This is the bottleneck when this happens, and so multitasking should also be harder in terms of from this part. So better to do one thing at a time or two things at a time, but multitasking may be particularly frustrating and difficult for adolescents, but extra wise. So this is it's hard to do precisely without more than one scan on people, but ballpark would be about 10 years. So whereas for people without XY, 25 to 30, and 35 to 40 with huge variation in terms of this isn't just like theoretical. 12-year-old girls can be great. They'll have counterfactuals. They'll be very good impulse control. All these things. 54-year-old never get that right. In terms of, and that really is happening. Some people never sort of achieve skills. Other people. So there's wide variation. Girls tend to do 18 to 3 years earlier and stuff, and most. But still, so much variation that it's not. You can't say, oh, you're 24. You have to wait 365 days, and then you'll magically have all these things. So these are kind of ballparkish notions, but I think that there might be implications of that in terms of because if you hang in there, in a sense, biology is on your side. But it's hard to hang in there. It's like self-esteem goes down, your confidence, so a lot of things that aren't sort of brain-based sort of things, more like social and stuff, they matter a lot. So how do you keep your spirits up? How do you keep trying? How do you keep motivated? And so it's great. All day, I've been meeting with people who did it. They found a way somehow, to keep trying, keep going. But I've also met a lot of people who don't. It's hard to keep at it. And it doesn't matter so that if I say, oh, but did you know that if you do, the brain biology is on your side, this is going to get better. Yeah, but it doesn't feel like it at that time. When you're feeling depressed and stuff like that, it's very little comfort to say, oh, in 10 years, things might be better. But I think that there is, an aspect of that might help for parents or people in terms of that, it's not a done deal, by 5 or 10, whatever the other, numbers were, that we need to find ways to, keep on this somewhat slower, but still steady improvement. And so this could even achieving independence and stuff, though maybe people will be at home longer, or maybe they'll need more support when they start entering the workplace, but do it. It's worth it. It's worth keeping at this. So this is in contrast somewhat to the more puberty-related aspects of the limbic system. And so this is something that frankly I don't have enough data as well in terms of, so people like, when people have puberty, hormones, they change these dopamine reward systems, a lot of changes happen. So you have this, this is B.J. Casey's work, this kind of notion, it's not really just like the prefrontal lobe is late to mature, because then children have even more problems. It's this imbalance, it's that the limbic starts and the prefrontal isn't done yet. So this shaded area here, that will be bigger, will be longer with extra Y chromosomes, and it's in this gray area then that we have many of the troubles and the good that we see in terms of decision making, risk taking, kind of behaviors, but it'll it still eventually does close that gap. So one of the approaches to this then is to look at how the brain grows in people that have extra Y chromosomes. And so when we've done that, the areas, now again, these are like snapshots in time. So this is what I wanted to build upon. But it's actually, as things go, this is kind of a pretty direct hit to what we see in terms of, so these parts of the brain involved in people with autism and the social interactions, temporal, bilaterally, so they're maturing less quickly. The frontal I'd already talked about in terms of this same area of the brain. The motor strip, so this is one that I've been learning a bit about more today in terms of like physical dexterity and penmanship and those sort of things. But then this area of the brain, right, like here in terms of the parietal brain, so not only sort of not a problem, actually enhanced in terms of more of accelerated development. And so this is what came up when I walked in. The first one I saw was Al, and he's like, oh, he's a sculptor, and then like we've talked to like the people that are in college and stuff, and a lot of them are doing very spatial, pursuits and stuff, and thought, yeah, I was like, I used to go home and play with Legos for hours, and so I've just been like wowed like today, and there's so much. I think this is, we were kind of wondering what would it be if somebody's sort of good at that? How do you even know? And so this could, I think, seems surprisingly consistent. Maybe it's just people that also come to this meeting, but that you could have this ability, then no one could even know it if it didn't come up. And I think that could happen. I think you could, like, how did, if you're good as a sculptor, if you never know a sculptor, if you've never even, try it. And so much of school is so verbal, right? I mean, it's all this assessment, everything is like words. and this is not word. This is not a word part of the brain. This is a hands-on. This is a gist. This is a very spatial thing. And just like one after another, I've been going to the support groups, and really, there's been so many Me Too's on this. Like the Lego thing. It seems like that's like so many of the kids really, and not a lot of kids have Legos on, but they really liked it, and they really enjoyed creating these things. So that's where the motorship thing's a little ironic. So you could be really good at conceptualizing it, but that doesn't mean you're good at actually drawing it, or executing the action. And so I think it's coincidental, but sometimes that might get in the way as well. You might actually be very good at that, but maybe you can't fold the paper fine enough or draw.
Is it across the conditions or is it different?
This one is just XXY, but great question. So I have a little bit of data on that, and I actually have to look at it because it's really new data. It looks to be the case for XYY. I'm less sure about XXX, and that could actually be kind of more than just a casual type of observation, because when we look at let's see, this is the another view of that same area. So red and yellow are the sort of deficit direction, and blue is in the other direction. So this is that same sort of part of the brain, the spatial thing. I think, and I don't want to make too much of this like everyone's, but this is interesting. This part of the brain that Einstein was most different in the same area. This who also described himself very spatial. He got it, and then it took him another several months to actually put into words and to explain it. It's like Rubik cube kind of things, but it's just this very kind of spatial orientation, thinking in terms of visual, maybe visual learning would probably be a better way to learn than listening. And this gets a little bit at your question in terms of comparing people with different versions of extra X's and Y's. So we kind of have the known possibilities of doing this, and so this is just I never can read through these tables stuff. I just the only one I had that kind of had our current numbers. You see, I have about 300 scans of people that have extra XY chromosomes. So I'm not just trying to annoy people by flashing this, but this is one of the things I thought was really interesting, is that every extra X you have makes your brain smaller, and every extra Y makes it bigger. And this isn't just political. Don't confuse bigger with better or smaller, because the brain matures. So nothing like that, but just kind of interesting, right? So if you have XY, add a Y, the brain is bigger. Add an X, smaller. So even amongst the non-typical configurations, so that part's kind of consistent. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. And then we're trying to parse the language part. And so here again, we have this sort of decoupling. So each extra Y that you have, then you have the language deficits more in the social type of language realms. And each extra X, the hit is in the non-social. And this kind of makes sense sort of from an autism type of perspective. But we're beginning to see kind of this differential effects. So this is what I meant sort of the quote hot off the press thing. So Monday was the first time this was created by Armin Rosnahan in our group. And we're still trying to make some sense of this, because so the other part we have is a sort of global, every extra X, total brain size smaller, every extra XY, so they're opposite effects, right? But then when we look at the local level, they're not opposite, they're the same. So whether you have an extra X or an extra Y affects these brain areas the same. So we're wow, how to make sense of that? So the parts of the brain that are often different between males and females in the circuitry, they're both affected by X or Y. And then there are certain parts of the X chromosome that get inactivated. So every extra X you have kind of gets shut down, but not the whole thing. So there's 10, 15% that escapes that. And then these genes have very different geographies than the other genes. And what's affected by different types of genes that either are just on the X, just on the Y, on the X and the Y, and the ones that get swapped or not, they all are affecting different regions of the brain differently. And so this is too new for me to digest, but it's actually not regions, it's layers of the brain. So it hasn't respected our traditional boundaries. But it's I think we're getting a bit of a handle on from XXY versus XYY versus what would we anticipate in terms of what kind of things would we see. And so when you mentioned the spatial area, I realized I actually have to look and see here in terms of what I would think would be different, because that would be kind of powerful if we could make predictions from the scans, and then we'll find them. So we'll say, oh, actually, based on this, we probably think that the XXX girls might have only non-social language deficits. So that's like usually the best science is when you do the science and you make a prediction that you can test. That's why the periodic table was so great too. Most of it was sort of like missing pieces and then they were later filled in. That was so powerful. So that's what we'd like to do with the brain imaging, to come up with ideas and then talk to the people and the parents. Does this ring true? Does this make sense? So there's there's no hole in the brain in terms of I wasn't sure the more kind way to say it, but like the scans are sent to the radiologist and they're normal. They come back as normal. That's not to say, oh, there's no issues. This is but there's no damage. There's no holes in the brain, bleeding. There's no tumors. There's no like pathology. So I think the differences are more in this notion of how the letters are connected and the trajectories of growth or the change over time, with some parts being accelerated and others being protracted, particularly spatial versus frontal. But these differences, I think, account for a lot of what parents and clinicians stuff might see. So we have this part of the brain that's like, let's think this through. Let's think of all the possible counterexamples. What are the different possible outcomes? Let's count to 10. And that's going to happen later in terms of than it might for the brothers and sisters. But through that all, there's a huge upside in terms of this plasticity and changeability of the brain. If we can figure out what to do better, there's time. If we can think of the right interventions, the right environmental things, maybe medicines in terms of the last session so much seems to depend on getting the right amount of testosterone throughout. So that could actually help with a lot of these other kind of things. Sorry, just a different talk. I didn't get the slides fixed up, but mostly, I generally thank the people here and stuff because, nothing we do that would have happened, been started without parents. I have never sort of seen that before in terms of where something truly only happened because of concerned families. And I feel bad that I can't give back more. I don't have now here's the cure, here's what we can do, and especially since I'm asking for more. In terms of that it'd be great for some of the reasons I totally like to follow up to see how the brain has changed over time, and I hope that's where I'm going. Do this sort of in a bigger, better way. But we're in a little bit of the pause button now, so I don't want to start new scanning and then have to switch all the equipment and stuff. It wouldn't be comparable. But when I do get set up, I was going to ask the organization and stuff. This would be the way I could communicate with a lot of the families and stuff, would be through the website and through the letters and stuff that go out. So Amber and I were sort of here in this odd mission of sort of recruiting. Oh, what are you recruiting for? Nothing, yet, sort of thing. And people are like, well, do you want us or not? Kind of thing. So kind of yes, but we have to wait a bit.
How long?
So I think 2014 to somewhere between January and June.
And what ages would it be?
Well, so like we have been doing 3 to 30, but I'm interested across the lifespan. So I was a geriatric psychiatrist before, child, and so as Sandy goes, well, there's a lot of lifespan type of things, and especially if we consider with adolescence, at least till 35, so that's already, sort of getting up there. So what I'd say is we're probably going to try to start with under 30, but I would hope to actually build upon that because there's lots of life after 30, 54 maybe. But yeah, so it all matters. So because there's this whole idea of palindromic, like a palindrome or last in, first out kind of thing, that the way the brain development works, the last things to mature are the first to go. I guess that wasn't completely obvious to me at first, but so that's intriguing in terms of wondering about across the lifespan type of changes. And the effects of getting the testosterone well regulated or unregulated. So several of it's very generational. Some of the people in the group size that they didn't know about testosterone replacement, they didn't have it, at all during adolescence. Other people, did. And so I would like to do it throughout the lifespan, but a very winding, windy answer in terms of that would probably start with the 3 to 30-year-olds or anybody who's already been in the study. Yes?
2 questions. Has anybody ever looked at testosterone's role in brain development in mouse models or anything? Do you know?
Have you, Amber? Have you?
No, has anybody ever?
Yeah, so Amber is studying fetal testosterone at Cambridge and is temporarily in our lab this summer. But so I think that people are beginning to, but have, do you know if there is?
There's been some studies on testosterone and puberty, and shown that, especially for connectivity, that testosterone has a big influence on connectivity. So that's one of the things I want to look at, and I'm looking at the influence of prenatal testosterone then on later in life. Also, the androgen receptor, which you've been hearing about today, has a big influence. Like if you have like a really good functioning one or a low functioning one, has a big influence on that as well. There are a few mouse models that look at testosterone as well. They also have mouse models looking at different sex chromosome variations. So they're doing more work at the moment as well, and also more brain imaging on mouse models as well. So far, they've only done post-mortem stuff, but there's a lot out there, so it's going to be very exciting.
It's coming up.
It's coming up, and it's going to be really good, yeah.
And then, sorry, one other question for you. So have you ever scanned people who have got testosterone versus people who have not got testosterone as adults?
Yeah.
So like 30-year-olds, say like maybe like my kid was diagnosed today, so they'll be getting testosterone at whatever puberty, but there are people who are diagnosed later in life. You see changes in their parietal or in frontal
I looked.
regions of the brain?
Yeah, I looked in. I didn't find it in that other study, but I think most because of numbers. So I think at that time, like 13 out of 18 had testosterone replacement, and it's really a key question. I'd really like to, know that. So if you, ideally identical twins, one need to give testosterone, one not. That probably is not going to happen. But that would be, because I really don't know. It's really intriguing to me. But just from the last couple of hours, like, man, testosterone affects everything. As our mood and thinking and it's like, so I would be amazed if it didn't have, these effects. And then there are testosterone and estrogen receptors, pretty widely distributed throughout the brain, but there are certain areas where there are, a lot of them, and like the hippocampus involved in memory is chock full of estrogen type receptors, amygdala more testosterone, and so there would be some rhyme and reason, to wondering about the effects of testosterone and different amounts at different ages. We did look at Turner syndrome mice in humans, so XO. And I was amazed because mice and human brains are pretty different. It was a really good sort of like the same, impact from mice to humans. So I'm actually pretty optimistic that we could learn a lot from the rodent or models. Because sometimes you go, well, like a lot of stuff, it's like, it's a rat, mouse, and they don't even have a frontal lobe, so that's the one part of the brain you probably wouldn't want. But yeah, but I might be wrong. I mean, it looks like there's some, some encouragement there. And I guess the other sort of, I guess, plug to wonder about is that because of costs and stuff, we really had to slow down at the NIH. But and Dr. Singh from UCLA mentioned recently this idea of online data gathering. And so that's like, oh, I think, well, that'd be great. Like, we'd have to do it through the organization, I think, but we could do it best, I should say that way. But there's so much, like, just information here. Is like, if we could sort of somehow, like, take advantage of, the organization itself in terms of have the right kind of questionnaires or tests to get even more information on a very, inexpensive way, in a sense, because people wouldn't have to travel to Denver or UCLA or Emory or, things. So we're going to think long and hard about are there certain things that we can do to
Why not just scan the brain with the iPhone?
yes, I'm working on. Yes, I can't. It's a military thing. I can't. No, but yeah, but the iPhone apps, they can be used to gather information. Like you can have, like, you give them the phone, when you call them, what am I doing? Eating junk food, playing video games. So that kind of stuff is, under consideration and underway in some places. And then even just like it's growing. I mean, there are more people interested in this, but given how many people's lives it's affected versus how many people researching, it's a total mismatch. And so one of the things that we're hoping that to kind of have more synergy. So like if they're getting blood for rheumatology or things, then to use that blood for the other things, much like autism, the world sort of have this kind of forced collaboration, or the funding's tied to it, but so that you only have to give us blood once, not 5 different places, because a lot of the people we talk to, they just want to help their kids or the world, and they don't care if it's Emory or Duke or NIH, they just want to do that. So if we can kind of get our act together a bit, we could get a lot of synergy, so that the people that have brain scans on have also seen Nicole and have also seen Gina. I think we could get more bang for the buck if we. But it doesn't sort of it's not like bad intentions and stuff. It just needs to be incentivized a bit, because we're all sort of scattered.
I personally, that's why I have a real passion for trying to get more centers set up for more clinics. And I think Nicole does agree with me on this. It doesn't detract from her work, because there are a lot of people that can't get here, and she doesn't have the money to get everyone here.
Yeah.
But if there's one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast and one in Denver and one in Texas and one in Chicago, then you're going to get more information, because more people will get to the clinics.
You'll also get more community, because people have a place to go in each state, and then it builds, there's a bigger population that's involved, and then we can all get
Attracts more
involved,
people
and
to the
it just kind of builds your whole community.
I mean, the other thing was the first, so getting blood here, I was like, oh, sort of like Johnny come lately, like, why didn't I think of that, sort of thing. But when people convene, for other reasons, that could also be a time to get certain information. So I thought that was brilliant, and I thought more of that,
Questions that have not been asked in a study situation. We were in another group, we were talking about tremors, and a young man with XYY said, my dad has a tremor too, and the presenter said, that's probably not anything like your tremor, and I said, my son has tremors, his dad has the exact same tremors,
Wow,
his grandfather, the dad is male, they all have the same tremors. I only know that my son has the extra Y, but has anyone
what a
looked
beautiful, yeah. So this would be like a classic sort of like, it's the Y and some other, it's a combination that would lead to that.
Right.
And so maybe like the reason that people with X or Y, there are some commonalities, but this huge variability we're talking about, because there's a whole bunch of other genes, and it could be the interaction. So you need that Y gene, but then your family's gene as well, and it's the two of them, and that happens that's like the rule, not the exception, or even 3 or 4. That's that, and then we pretend like that doesn't exist. We kind of keep focusing on.
But that's
Yeah.
the whole,
Yeah.
that presenter, Jeannie, said, before that all happened, she said, the reason I love coming here is I learn
Yeah.
When people in the audience start going, but I have this and I have this, then that
So-
raises a question.
So this is a little embarrassing. So like the term one came up as well. So when it's like, so, and then the one just has like something, oh, I get, migraines. And I'm like, oh, coincidence, like random, and me too, me too. No one was going, so, okay, I was just kidding before, sort of like, oh, this, and so that was another great example. It's like, and then it's like the Amber said, like, yeah, there's a well-known link between estrogen and migraine things, and so who knew? I didn't, know that, and it's just, it's hard, even if you're well-meaning, it's hard to keep up, how these changes.
Food allergies, that was one that,
Yeah.
they start going, yeah.
But that's where like it's not going to happen from the medical community. I mean, they're going to learn from you in terms of it, and the support groups of people doing kind of just this, maybe even kind of like the Me Too part, because it's like, wow, sort of, you were saying like again and again. The other thing that I had kind of thought through, we were talking about like socially, and that how many people that are in college now who sort of, through lots of hard work and effort are succeeding well, that a common denominator seems that they had a band or a basketball team or it didn't matter what specifically, but they found a group to be part of and to have that family type of thing. So that as well to me is, oh, that, it's not like, well, that's shocking, I can't believe it's true, but still it's like, that could be something to wonder about in terms of the bullying kind of things as well. It's like, it's easier to be bullied if you're apart from the pack, if you're on your own. But if the social skills are hard, then that might make you even more vulnerable to bullying. Yeah, lots of thoughts have already emerged in terms of to turn those thoughts into actions and to research. But I don't know, like 200 some people here, right? For that's pretty good in terms of and hopefully we can keep the momentum and the funding aspect as well. It's a challenging time, but I think there is a lot of things that the families can do in some ways better than the researchers in terms of that was a great success in autism, was people sort of getting the politicians then to tell the NHS people, no, you need to prioritize this. So hopefully we're kind of hitting this sort of critical mass where we can actually combine the imaging and the genetics and the behavioral and the testosterone changes, because we need to start helping people, not just getting information from them.
Well, when I look at your brain studies, my first thought and how that can help is that maybe we can figure out the way in which people with SCAs learn.
Yeah.
And tailor their education to the way in which they best learn based on how their brain works.
I mean, that potentially could, like, this whole idea of, like, the spatial, strength. And again, it's all kind of averages, right? Not every person with an XY is going to be a genius in spatial things. But enough, I think, that teachers should know about that, right? So it's like, try teaching it, in a more visual, hands-on way. The trouble is that, like, sometimes you can convince the teacher to do that, and then next year start over again, because you have a new teacher. So it takes an incredible amount of advocacy skill and effort to do that. So maybe things could be done at a higher level where people, would sort of not have to be convinced one-on-one that the website or things could sort of endorse, like, hey, you need to consider non-verbal, approaches to teaching things. But because it seems like people have stumbled upon it more than that people went out of their way to say, oh, you have this, you should, learn visually or hands-on. They just somehow, arrived at that through good fortune.
Well, and I think one thing, my oldest children are now 30 or 30-ish, 29, 30. So when they were little, Sesame Street was the big deal, and everyone was cautioning that what we've done to their brains is made them unable to concentrate for more than however long the little segments were. Well, and then everybody was all worried about that, but now my next generation of children who are 12 and
Yeah, and
It's
phones,
just like,
yeah.
Sesame Street is boring,
Right.
because
Yeah.
I'm like,
So
oh,
long,
it's gonna take
yeah.
so long to get to the
But not just kids, right? Like, so they do these studies where they look at like lines at a bank and stuff like that. After about 25, 30 seconds, most people pull out their phone
Right.
and entertain themselves. Like maybe, I mean, this life or death call, mostly probably, and I do
Right.
stuff as well. But we're not, it's like we need it almost. Like it's like, oh, we can't tolerate boredom. It's like no, and the devices are really good at it, but they there may be a price to pay in terms of that lack of patience and sort of the steady trickle of dopamine that the
There's no going back, that's what I know.
yeah, but there could kind of be. So one of the things that's been thrown out is meditation, and not specifically for XXY or things, but in terms of in this sort of multitasking frenetic thing, it's cheap, it's not medicine and stuff. That just a few minutes a day, just for people to sort of unmultitask, to try to practice, focus, because the brain gets good at what you practice, and if you never try, to unplug, if you never try to focus on one thing, it's less likely to happen. Some of the stuff is like pretty cheap. Adele Diamond is one. You give them a bell, so you don't ring it, and it's actually harder than it seems because if you get distracted, if you stop, you move and it rings, and that actually correlates with their reading and math scores. So but you have to kind of okay, I'm not going to ring the bell, and that's like what $1, whatever a bunch of bells cost. So it doesn't all have to be high tech, sort of eye tracking type of device, but I think that would be interesting, and to see like, can you, does meditation help?